I know a number of you are going to want to know more about the Imus 4-beat saddle, and we didn't want to place it on our video series directly because the series wasn't about selling product, but it was about educating our viewers. However, we'd like to also take the opportunity to educate our viewers about the features of the Imus 4-beat saddle, and if we don't put it on a DVD, then we're going to be overwhelmed with emails and telephone calls. So we thought we'd do this so that you folks could find out all about the Imus 4-beat saddle. And probably the question we get asked most frequently is, why do we have 3-point rigging and how does it work? What are the advantages of it? 3-point rigging is when you have one cinch, one latigo that goes from the rear rigging back down to the cinch and ties off at the back. By the way, this is rigged both sides exactly the same way. Now we have the front rigging. It's called 3/4 fired as opposed to 7/8 fired. What that means is quite a bit farther back than your standard or typical type saddle rigging. The reason we've done this is because we want to keep this cinch behind, farther back on the barrel and farther back behind the elbow, because the most active point of the horse's beard is right there behind the elbow, especially for gaited horses. They have more lift or reach there. So if you put a cinch right there, chances are sometime in that horse's life you're going to get a saddle gall. Now, the reason we have put the rigging like this is because we want to hold both the front and the back end of that saddle down. If you hold only the front end of the saddle down, then as the horse moves and it has that active motion behind, then what happens is the back end of the saddle just keeps up with every step that the horse takes. And you can end up having soreness in the back, and particularly right behind the wither. So since most people don't use rear riggings in a way where they actually contact the horse, we have one latigo, one cinch, and we rig it from front to back, and that way the saddle's held down from front to back, and there's a lot more stability there, but we still only have to have one cinch. We start in the back rather than in the front for a couple of reasons. The most important reason being for safety. If we started in the front and come down to the cinch, go back to the back and come down and then tie off in the back, then we've only got a single layer of leather down from that front rigging. And if there's ever an accident or the leather gets old and breaks, you haven't got anything else there to hold it in place. This way you've got a couple different, you're coming back and forth a couple different times off of both of them, so you're a little safer. We tie off in the back because we want to keep all that extra knotting out from under the rider's leg, and that's a good way to do it. This happens to be our standard tree, and as you see, the angles of the beneath do reflect a little bit more angle, because gaited horses, 80 or 85% of gaited horses are more A-framed than Western or stock type horses. The other feature of the tree that's really important are the flexible tree bars. Amanda's going to show you how the tree does flex. It flexes just enough that it will allow the saddle to move in unison with the horse's back, so that the horse is not being held stiff and rigid under a wooden, non-flexible saddle tree, but that under the rider's weight, that tree will give ever so slightly to the action of the horse's back, and really, really help him to be a lot more comfortable than he would be otherwise. Something that we can't show right here, right now, but that is equally important to the flexible tree, is that under the saddle tree, along both edges, both bars, we completely line that with a product called Supercore therapeutic padding. Now, Supercore entered the market as a therapeutic padding for patients who are comatose or bedridden, and it prevents pressure soreness on those kinds of fragile patients. It has a tremendous amount of resiliency, and it eliminates the possibility of pressure soreness, assuming that the saddle is a reasonably good fit. As we were designing this saddle, we realized it wasn't good enough for the saddle to be only comfortable for the horse. It needed to be equally comfortable for the rider, because if it is not comfortable, stiff, and if a rider is stiff, the horse is going to go stiff. So we instituted a couple of different design features. One that I'm particularly proud of is that we also put the Supercore therapeutic padding into the seat of the saddle. Now this is an expensive material, but we find that people who ride it talk about it riding like a cloud. And we think that it's worth every dime that we spend to put that kind of material in the seat. There isn't another product on the market that even comes close. The other really important feature that we have arranged so that the stirrups hang a little farther forward than what is traditional. This allows the rider to be seated in a position that's very much like a bareback rider's position, whereby the is slightly ahead of the position of their hip. It's also a very flexible and free swinging stirrup, so that whatever way the rider is comfortable riding, that stirrup can accommodate it. But what we really have found is that riders who ride saddle, because of the position of the stirrup, can ride for hours and hours without having the stress on their hips, ankles, and knees that is usually found with riders who ride with stirrups that are set far back right under the rider's seat. As we show with our bareback riding demonstration in clinics and through this video series, we've discovered that most riders who ride bareback and don't depend on their saddle stirrups or cantle or horn or the reins for balance tend to ride directly to the horse's wither. That's where they like to be seated. That's the true center of gravity on the horse. Well, most saddle designs are such that the saddle is actually placed so that the front edge of the tree bar is behind the horse's wither. Now there is that allows the shoulder to move freely. Unfortunately, the secondary effect of that is that while the shoulder may or may not roll freely, actually what generally happens is that as the shoulder or scapula rolls back with a stride, it actually hits the tree bar because of the positioning. But the other unfortunate effect of having that set back like that is that the rider's weight is carried farther back on the horse's back. That's not the horse's center of gravity, and in fact, it's the weakest part of the horse and can contribute a tremendous amount of pain and discomfort for the horse, and eventually, often, it contributes to the horse becoming somewhat sway back.